The purpose of this presentation is to talk about childhood vaccinations and whether they're safe and what exactly are they and how do they work. We'll hop right on into our discussion where we'll just answer several of the most common questions that people have in regards to vaccines. How do vaccines work? Let's start with the absolute basics. 1, you're introduced to the antigen, weakened inactive virus or bacteria or genetic coding. 2, the body then produces antibodies against disease. And 3, when exposed to the disease, the body will now know how to fight it off, preventing infection altogether or preventing any serious illness or death. Components of vaccines. So what actually is in vaccines? It's different for each one of them, but here are some of the possible ingredients in vaccines. They all have antigens, the main active ingredient. Now, we'll look at this in detail on the next slide, but this is the main component that's going to induce immunity. It plays the most important role. Then you have adjuvants. Adjuvants help to strengthen the immune response to the antigen. There are different types of adjuvants, the most common one being aluminum salts, which has been used since the 1930s. Stabilizers. This helps to protect the integrity of the vaccine, so it stops chemical reactions and helps to prevent the separation of the ingredients. And then you have preservatives. This is to help prevent contamination of the vaccine, which is very important. And then, most of all, you have water. All vaccines pretty much have water in order to be injected. A quick look at some of the key differences between traditional vaccines and COVID vaccines with their newer technology. Let's look at the traditional creation of vaccines, which is using the virus itself in a couple different ways. It could be using the attenuated virus, that just basically means a weakened form of the virus so that it can't replicate enough to cause disease, but it will activate immunity. Sometimes it is a completely inactivated virus. That's when it's completely killed off, but it's still able to be presented to the body to activate the immunity and be recognized. Or sometimes it's just using a part of the virus or bacteria. Using only one part, the one that's most responsible for stimulating immunity, with bacteria toxins that are isolated and killed off so that they're inactive. Those are called toxoids. Now, looking at the recent COVID vaccines, these were created by just providing the genetic code. So the body forms the proteins for immunity. And this holds true for the mRNA vaccine of Pfizer and Moderna. A little bit different for the viral vector ones by Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, but they were just placed in an adenovirus. Take a sidestep here. We're going to talk about the central dogma of molecular biology and how this basic concept helped to shape the process of the COVID mRNA vaccines. First, let's take a look at the concept of central dogma itself within us as a living organism. We have DNA, which makes copies of itself through replication, which is transcribed through what we call messenger RNA, which is then responsible for synthesizing the proteins needed for our body. So taking what we know about the central dogma helps us to understand how the newer technology of the mRNA vaccines actually works within our body. Instead of being injected with the virus itself in any kind of form, we are using mRNA genetic material instead that is specific to SARS-CoV-2 to instruct our body to make the protein, the spike protein, for our bodies to generate the antibodies to fight it and get the immune response against COVID. Basically, it's making our bodies do the work to produce what we need to fight the disease rather than having to create it in the lab with a lengthy process. So we have faster creation, only needing the genetic coding, and it's an easier production to rely on the body, and no live virus is needed, and it's also cost effective. And this isn't new technology. This has been tested for a while, and COVID just kind of presented the perfect reason to move forward with this. And something important to note here, though, I do want to say that mRNA does not enter the nucleus and absolutely does not alter DNA. It actually breaks down very quickly, making this a really revolutionary discovery. Approval process of vaccines. This is the same for all of the current childhood vaccines as well as the COVID vaccines. And it can be helpful to know and make you feel a little safer about how a vaccine comes to be. They all go through these steps. First, you have the exploratory stage. This is where the lab research is done on antigens, processes, and the predicted outcomes before they can move on to the preclinical stage. This is where further testing is done, usually involving animal studies, testing the immune response, before they can then move on to clinical trials, which are broken up into phase 1, 2, and 3 for human trials, where they are going to study the safety and efficacy of the vaccine before they can actually move to the approval and licensure process. In the United States, that's through the FDA. After approval, there are VAERS reports in order to report any adverse effects, and sometimes an optional phase 4 clinical trial as well. The same exact process applied to the COVID vaccines, but the time frame looks a little different for several reasons. First, the beginning phases of exploratory and preclinical were pulled partially from past studies of mRNA vaccine technology, as well as studies on coronaviruses, especially SARS and MERS. Along with that previous research, helping to build a foundation for the research necessary for a COVID vaccine, we had an undeniable pressure from an unprecedented event of, well, a global pandemic that has been nothing short of catastrophic. That helped to fuel what was named Operation Warp Speed, which pushed a quicker timeline, but also many more funds into the pipeline to make it happen. It still went through all of the necessary steps for approval, but also did a little sidestep to an emergency authorization use first, given the circumstances of needing a vaccination to begin to stop the damages of this disease. It then went through full approval, though, as well, without any issue. Childhood vaccination schedule for the United States as recommended by the CDC. Here is a list of all of these that you and everyone else you know has likely had with no questions asked. We have Hep B first, and then rotavirus. Then we have the DTaP right here, which covers diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis all in one shot. Hib, which protects against the bacteria Haemophilus influenza type B. PCV13 is a pneumococcal vaccine. IPV is against polio. And then we have the combined MMR for measles, mumps, and rubella. Lastly, varicella, aka chickenpox, and Hep A. A bunch of nasty things that we can greatly prevent here by sticking to this vaccination schedule. I'm certainly very thankful to have avoided these diseases, and I'm glad that I'm able to do the same for my child. It is no surprise that childhood disease has been greatly reduced from vaccination. A few fun facts here. It's been estimated that vaccines have prevented 6 million deaths every year. Also, there was a specific study in 2009 on a birth cohort that estimated that nearly 20 million cases of disease and 42,000 deaths were prevented. So it's really helpful to see when the numbers really pan out. Overall, the diseases that were the big bad guys throughout the 20th century, wreaking havoc in the form of major disease and death, had declined 90% by 2017. This is mainly due to nearly all of the population being vaccinated with DTaP, MMR, and polio vaccines. That is undeniably amazing. And polio is nearly eradicated in the entire world. There are only 2 places that have continued to report cases. That's in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And it's been in very low numbers. So hopefully it will be entirely wiped out as it has been in the US, hopefully in the entire world eventually. And here's just a quick look at a nice little table here that helps you to kind of browse to wrap your head around just how much progress has been made to reduce disease thanks to vaccines. Moving on to a highly debated topic, vaccines and autism. Vaccine hesitancy is nothing new, and it's been around as long as vaccines have. It became a real hot topic, though, in the 90s when a doctor by the name of Andrew Wakefield published a controversial study on the link between the MMR vaccine and autism, so he said. He made some wild claims based off of merely 12 participants in his study, which in fact was retracted from the medical journal that published it originally. There was a huge conflict of interest, seeing as he patented a single antigen measles vaccine himself and had all kinds of funding coming his way pushing for, well, a certain outcome. Upon further investigation, they even detected research fraud, where what he was reporting about his subjects did not hold true. Since then, there has been massive amounts of evidence of the contrary, that there is in fact no scientific backing for any causation of autism from the MMR vaccine, or any vaccine for that matter. This was concluded with much larger scale studies, with proper controls in place, and without conflicts, bias, or corruption. Something worth noting as well is that generally there is likely an increase in autism statistically due to simply more recognition of the condition and more accurate diagnosis for those with it these days. Thimerosal. We talked about this component earlier as a preservative in vaccines. Well, after the heated debate of MMR vaccines, many anti-vaxxers went after this key ingredient causing autism. Thimerosal is a type of mercury. Mercury is in fact found in our own environment. You're probably most familiar with hearing about mercury levels in fish, which we do consume, but yes, we do have limitations. However, that type of mercury is called methylmercury, which differs from the type of mercury that is in some vaccines, which is actually ethylmercury. Thimerosal is ethylmercury, which is broken down by the body much quicker than methylmercury and poses no threat to our health and absolutely does not cause autism for that matter. This has been studied in length and once again debunked that it has any adverse effects. Even with that in mind, it's not even in most current formulas of vaccines, besides for an influenza multi-dose shot. Bottom line, vaccines do not cause autism. They are not filled with a bunch of things out to get you or kill you. They have been proven safe with many, many benefits to keep you healthy and safe from disease. Yes, there are very rare instances of adverse events or allergic reactions to vaccines, just as with anything in life. However, the benefits far outweigh the risk when it comes to nearly every vaccine. It would be a disservice to yourself, your child, and others to not properly vaccinate. I feel that understanding the science behind vaccines and how they work can really bring an understanding and comfort to society in making the wise choice to immunize. In conclusion, I truly feel like vaccines have done so much for the health of our society. I am grateful to be vaccinated, to have vaccinated my child for all vaccines available to him so far, and would strongly recommend that you vaccinate your child for their protection. Vaccines save lives.